From the Rafters of Rupp is brought to you by Clark's Pump and Shop, Double Dogs, Friends of Coal, Hunt Brothers Pizza, and by Kentucky Farm Bureau.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to From the Rafters of Rupp. I'm Kyle Macy. This season, we continue to highlight former Kentucky legends that have not made their way to the rafters yet, but have had an incredible influence on the program. For this episode, I sit down with a man that never suited up for the Big Blue, but his name is recognized by Kentucky fans all over the world. So sit back and enjoy the next 30 minutes of From the Rafters of Rupp, Kentucky basketball legends. Oscar Combs grew up in a small eastern Kentucky town called Jeff, just outside of Hazard off of Route 15. He went to the now defunct Dills Combs High School that still overlooks Jeff today. While in high school, Combs was the basketball manager for the Panthers. That position started a passion for Combs.
That sort of was a trigger to my career. I, in addition to being manager, kept the scorebook. You know how that is. And I got to be friends with the coaches up there at a young age. At the end of my freshman year, they allowed me to keep the scorebook for the district and regional tournaments. And the great thing about that is it paid $35 per game, which was a whole lot of money back then. And after my sophomore year, I met a fellow by the name of Earl Cox. Earl was the sports editor of the Courier-Journal, and he came to Hazard with Adolph Rupp to watch a regional tournament and some players up there. And Earl was introduced to me by Fred Louisgard, who was head of the Courier-Journal Bureau in Lexington, who had worked in Hazard one time and knew me from a couple years earlier. And so my sophomore year, 15 turning 16, I got to write a weekly column for the Courier-Journal every Tuesday on the 14th region.
After high school, Earl Cox had worked things out for Combs to go to UK, but Combs decided on going to Cumberland College, which is now the University of Cumberland's. He decided not due to cost or schools, but for a reason a lot of Eastern Kentucky kids had back then.
Growing up in Eastern Kentucky, kids were put down every chance you got when you read editorial pages. Papers like the Lexington Herald, Lexington Leader, Courier-Journal, Louisville Times. And we'd go to class, and one of the teachers would go, "Now, if you don't get a B on this, you're going to be like," and they'd hold up the editorials. You're not going to be able to compete in the world. And that had an effect on me personally. And when it come time to go to UK, I thought, I'll go down to UK. I'll flunk out the first semester because I'm just not as bright as these other kids. And so I really got cold feet and I didn't tell Earl Cox this. But I did, so I went to Cumberland. Years later, I found out, don't believe everything you read in the newspaper. Oh, I think it's very much true even today, because when you leave there and you come here, you're already half defeated. It's sort of like a coach preparing you for a game. You're a 20-point underdog. And there's a fine line between making you aware of what can happen or making you think this is likely to happen. And I know there were several other kids at my school that could have done better, but they were ready to give up. I mean, you're told to believe the newspapers, and I think the newspapers was wanting to send a message, but they ended up sending a message that wasn't received the way it was intended.
Before the end of his senior year at Cumberland's, an opportunity with his hometown paper opened, and it was something he just couldn't turn down.
And the newspaper position, which I'd always been eyeing since a little boy, came open, and I thought, wow, it might not be open at Christmas. Plus, to be honest, I was tired of school. I couldn't wait to get out. That's all the motivation I needed to take the job. So I left about 15 hours short of my degree.
As Combs moved up the journalism ranks, he found himself working at the Lexington Herald-Leader, but an opportunity would soon open up back home in eastern Kentucky.
So I left the Herald in September of '69 and become the editor and general manager / publisher of the East Kentucky Voice. And finally, in the meantime, I had bought a newspaper over in Cumberland, which was a small weekly. There wasn't a whole lot of money involved in it, but I was making more money there and not even being over there. I had another guy to run it for me that I was making in Hazard, putting it in 18 hours a day. So I made him aware that I was going to resign that and I was going to move to Cumberland, running the Cumberland paper. They came back to me and asked me if I would take over the Hazard paper, and they would make me a price that would be very attractive. And they did. So I bought the East Kentucky Voice in '72. I ran it till '75.
We'll be right back with more of my conversation with Oscar Combs after these words from our sponsors.
For those on the go, the smoothie connoisseur, the break room favorite, and for those that just never quite have it all, Clark's has what you need to keep your day on track. Make life easier and keep your busy schedule moving forward with everything you need at Clark's. Clark's Pump and Shop. Return, refresh, refuel.
Fresh, tasty, savory. Double Dogs is a great place to eat. Whether you like sports or you just like great food, from pizza to salads to burgers to our legendary fried pickles. Double Dogs. In a single word, delicious.
In October of 1975, things were going great for Combs. He was married, his Hazard paper was doing well, but a business meeting would change his career trajectory forever.
So in '75, I was at the point that I had pretty much won the battle in Hazard between the two newspapers, and I was going to buy out the Hazard Herald and own the whole ball of wax. And the guys came in ready to cut the deal with me, and they sat down and said, why don't you sell to us? And I was arrogant, and that's putting it mildly. And I said, you guys don't have enough money to buy me out. Because I was wanting to, they were pretty ruthless, a big company. They were treating me like the little stepchild, and they were burying me. But then at the end, they were like, we'll show him. And so they said, how much you want? I said, you don't have enough money. And they said, well, just give us the privilege of being able to say no, that we try. So I just scribbled down a figure on a piece of paper that was what I thought was about 5 times what it was worth. Now, what it was really worth, I'll never know. Right. And just turned around and flipped it back over there, and here was the vice president of the company, and he had 2 lawyers with him, and they had a checkbook with him. And he looked at it, and he looked at the 2 lawyers, and he said, how do you want that check made out?
After selling his Hazard paper, Combs and his wife Donna celebrated with a trip to Cincinnati and the World Series to see the Big Red Machine that night.
And so I go back in, tell Donna, I said, run home, pack us an overnight bag, we're going to Cincinnati. And she said, we got a paper to put out today. And I said, no, we don't. She said, what do you mean? I said, we don't own this paper anymore. We're going to Cincinnati World Series tonight. Big Red Machine, and not only Big Red Machine, she'd been wanting a Lincoln Continental for a long time. Believe it or not, I went to a dealer in Cincinnati. The next morning, I went to the game and bought me a red and white Lincoln Continental, custom made.
While semi-retired, Combs and his wife took a trip to New York City to see the Cats in the 1976 NIT. Being the type of person that's never met a stranger, Combs started a conversation with some gentlemen that sparked an idea that would eventually connect him with Kentucky fans forever.
So the third game we come back, and there's nobody sitting around us that we know, except three guys sitting to my left. And they were in coat and tie. People still wore coat and ties in those days, you know. And I got intrigued by who they were and got to talking to them. And they were businessmen who were working in New York City at the time. And one of them was from Boston, one was from Philadelphia, and one was from near Washington, D.C. originally. And I got to ask them, you know, what their ties to Kentucky was. And they said, well, we really don't have any ties. I said, well, I know y'all been here for the first three games. You seem to be big Kentucky fans. Oh, yeah, we're big fans. Well, what's the case? And they said, oh, we've been listening to Kentucky basketball on the radio with Kaywood Ledford and WHAS for 20 years. And so we were back in the hotel room and thinking about it. And now this is March, and I hadn't had anything to do since October. And I got thinking, you know, maybe we'll just go to Lexington and start a paper.
A paper covering UK sports. Sounds like a great idea, but it would take several years to get enough of the UK hierarchy on board to get it started. He needed Joe B. Hall.
We talked for about 20 minutes and finally he said, Oscar, I think this is the greatest idea that's ever come down the pike, and I'm just happy that you came up with it because the media around here won't do anything positive about our program.
We'll be right back with more of my conversation with Oscar Combs after these words from our sponsors.
Careful no over torque for if destroy railing. Who writes this stuff?
Hi, honey. How's it going?
Oh, it's going good. Really good.
It might be difficult to understand what you got yourself into when the box says some assembly required. But with a Kentucky Farm Bureau agent in every county, at least it's easy to get great insurance. Kentucky Farm Bureau, big on commitment.
Should be ready by the time she's in high school. Yeah.
The coal industry's had a big impact on my life. My grandfather was a coal miner, my father was a coal miner. Coal is the largest driving force in our local economy. Have you ever wondered why developing countries don't have the same water and air quality we do? That's because affordable and abundant energy dramatically improves environmental quality and climate safety. You know, I want that for my daughter and her kids as well. That's why I'm a friend of coal.
Now that Combs' vision was about to become reality, how would he get his UK-centric paper in the hands of Wildcat fans? Commonwealth Stadium was the answer.
We gave every fan at Commonwealth Stadium a copy that day. I say everyone, we took 30,000 copies over there. Had Jim Kovach on the cover with his wife and their baby. And that was I think that was his senior year. Later played for New Orleans Saints, become a doctor.
Now that his paper called The Cat's Paws launched, it was met with very positive reviews. Combs knew that there were Wildcat fans not just in Lexington, but all over the country. He remembered back to the conversation he had had with those gentlemen at the NIT in New York City.
If I can bump into three guys in New York City that are this big of Kentucky fans, you know, I think they're out there. And part of that goes back to my growing up days in Eastern Kentucky in the 50s when so many people out-migrated to Indiana and Ohio and Michigan to get jobs when the coal industry first crashed. And I just knew there were a lot of people out there.
In a time with no internet, Combs came up with some clever marketing ideas to get the Cat's Paws to even more Kentucky fans.
I did some unique things each week when we would publish it. If we were on the road, and you'll probably remember that, you'd see me come carrying a stack of 100 newspaper of Cat's Paws. And I would take and I put so many in the media room at the visiting arena, but then I would go out my rental car and I'd go to 6 or 7 of the hotels, say around Athens or Stark or wherever, and just leave them laying in the lobby. because a lot of Kentucky's fans on the road, I mean, nobody attracted basketball fans on the road like Kentucky did. I mean, most schools you might see 25 or 30. Kentucky, they'll have 1,000 or more there. And we started getting subscriptions from different places. I have to thank a lot of sports writers around the country because they would pick up that copy and they'd get tidbits out of it and run it in their daily columns the next week. And that was probably my best marketing ploy of all, was putting them in the press boxes.
Combs learned quickly that a large population of Kentucky Wildcat fans weren't graduates of UK, but went to other schools or lived outside of Lexington. This program was the Commonwealth's team.
When we printed our first edition, we had 600 subscribers. And most of them came from an ad in the Courier-Journal, believe it or not. We sent out close to 8,000 flyers to UK alumni, and we got back less than 50. And I'll tell you this, you're dyed in the wool, you're a true Kentucky sports fan, most likely never attended a single class on the University of Kentucky campus. They're more likely went to Moorhead, Eastern, Western, or a private school than UK.
Over the next 2 decades, the Cat's Paws would continue to grow in popularity. It would see the likes of Kersey, Claiborne, Hall, Sutton, Curry, and Patino grace its cover. However, something happened in 1990 that began to shift Combs' attention away from the papers.
1990, I had a heart attack, had a bypass, and came out of it thanks to the good old friend of yours and mine, Lee Shine, who's no longer with us, rest his soul. And then in 96, I had a second one. And when I had the second one, it sort of opened my eyes that, you know, one day you're going to be gone. It's just how soon or how long. And come to realization that stress was, I'm a perfectionist, type A personality. If I've got something that needs to be done, say today's Monday, it needs to be done Friday, I work all day today and all night tonight and get it done tomorrow. Right. And it just got to the point that if I had a third one and I died, then my business, because it was me, would be worth virtually nothing. And being an independent businessman, you're unemployed, there's no big gravy train waiting there as far as a payout or anything. So I just decided that, you know, it's time to sort of view the future.
But such as Combs' life is gone, when one door closes, another opens. He would find himself still working around UK sports, but within another form of the media.
Right at the time I sold the paper, 2 of my friends come in again, and that was Ralph Hacker and Jim Host, and wanted to talk about doing a radio show around the game for callers to call in. And they talked to me and Dave Baker, and sort of liked the idea. It was going to give me something to sort of, you know, not just go cold turkey altogether. We ended up doing it 20 years, and he said, you want to do a pregame calling show or postgame? And I told Ralph, I said, of all people to ask me that question, you know the answer to that. I want the guys calling in at least with 1 drink under the belt, not 7 or 8. And you hadn't won or lost if it's a pregame show. Right. So we got on the pregame show, and we did that, and, you know, it worked out pretty well.
We'll be right back with more of my conversation with Oscar Combs after these words from our sponsors.
Hunt Brothers Pizza has been proudly serving communities across America for over 30 years. Download the Hunt Brothers Pizza app to find one of our 8,000 locations inside a convenience store near you. Choose from Hunt Brothers Pizza's original crust or thin crust, then customize your pizza with any of our 10 toppings to choose from at no extra charge. With that many options, there's sure to be a topping combination for everyone to enjoy a Hunt Brothers Pizza. Call ahead and order yours today.
The 78 championship game at UK is something we will never forget. Winning takes time. It's something that we learned during our years of playing ball with one another, and creating this blend of a 5-year and a 50-year-old Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey is no exception. Basketball has always been something that has brought this state together, and we have the opportunity to combine that with one of Kentucky's greatest traditions, an amazing Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey.
This episode of From the Rafters of Rupp wouldn't be complete if we didn't end it with a personal story from Oscar Combs. He crossed paths many times with Coach Hall and Coach Rupp. However, this story with the two legendary coaches might be one of his best.
I guess it was July of '76, and I was working. We'd done a big color edition for the first football game with Kovac on it, and we were going to do something about Rupp Arena as a first edition in basketball for the first week of December. And a good friend of mine who was a noted artist, you know him, he painted your picture, Ted Watts out of Oswego, Kansas, suggested that I'd do a painting of Rupp Arena with Rupp and Hall posing in front of it. And I said, there's more likely of me being struck by lightning than get them two together for that. He said, well, think about it. So I did. And so I went down to Coach Hall one day because I knew that, I had to have his blessing. He's the current coach, not the ex-coach. Right. And he said, well, I think that's a good idea. And he said, have you talked to Coach Rupp? I said, no, but I will. And so I called Coach Rupp. And he said, yeah, I'll be happy to do that. So we set it up, and Joe called me back, and he said, now, how's Coach Rupp going to get down to the arena to make the picture? I said, well, I'm going to pick him up. He said, well, why don't you come by and pick me up at the Coliseum and we'll go together. And so we did, and we went out and shot the picture stuff, and we sent them to Ted Watson, came back with beautiful painting. We put it on there. And I was sort of proud of the fact that I got that, and people really didn't know the story, but after we got it and we ran it in the paper and everything, I get a call from Ted, and he said, why don't you make some prints of that? And I said, what do you mean? Now, this was a forerunner of the Macy posters and the Roby posters. And he told me what to do, and I did it. And I said, boy, these are nice. So I thought, I want to get Coach Rupp and Coach Hall to sign to these. So I got ready to go, and I thought, well, I better take them some too. So I took 15, had 15 put together. So I went into Coach Hall's office, and I took in 10, 5 for me and 5 for him. And I asked if he'd sign them. He said, sure. And he signed them. He said, you going to have Coach Rupp sign these? And I didn't know where to say, yeah or no, I just want you, But I didn't want to lie. And so I said, well, I don't know. He said, hey, won't you take my 5 and get Coach Rupp to sign them too? So I'm back with 15 of them. I go over to Coach Rupp, and I go in. I don't tell him I'm getting 5 signed for Joe, but he notices they're all in there. And I did not have Coach Hall to sign any for Rupp. So there's 5 of them in there. It's not signed for either one. And he says, well, I know you got Coach Hall signed on. He says, do you go down to basketball very often? Now, of course, I was in there every day. And I said, well, occasionally. And he said, well, would I trouble you too much if I ask you to take these down and let Coach Hall sign these 5 for me? And I said, well, sure. When I left his house, I was on cloud 9. I got Coach Hall to ask for Adolph Rupp's signature, and then I got Coach Rupp to ask for Joe Hall's signature. And these were supposed to be bitter enemies.
Oscar Combs isn't in the Rafters of Rupp, but he probably should be. With a career spanning 7 decades, he's provided Kentucky fans with a gateway into the lives of Wildcat players and coaches. Most importantly, he's been a voice for the fans when Twitter, Facebook, and the internet weren't around. We'll leave you with one final comment from Combs that sums up what Kentucky basketball means to the Commonwealth. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Until next time, when we hear more stories from the Rafters of Rupp.
There aren't many things that Kentucky can lay claim to nationally and internationally that are positive. You can go anywhere on the face of the earth, and if you throw the name out Kentucky, the first 3 things that comes to the typical non-Kentuckian is, and you can put whatever order you want to, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Kentucky Basketball, Kentucky Derby. Whatever's fourth is way, way behind.
From the Rafters of Rupp was brought to you by Clark's Pump and Shop, Double Dogs, Friends of Coal, Hunt Brothers Pizza, and by Kentucky Farm Bureau.